Burials, however, outside of that kind of ceremonial area. So at La Benta we find a carved basalt sarcophagus, and it was found in this particular log tomb. There are 2 infant burials in the tomb and lots of grave goods. Now this kind of implies that we have inherited status here, or ascribed status. So otherwise, why would infants be buried in a rather elaborate tomb? And here's some of the grave goods. Jade becomes a kind of important figure, and you can see the kind of deformed looking heads here that can easily be done by using cradle boards on an infant's head. Some of the middens around the Olmec sites have burnt and broken human bones, so some people have suggested that there was some ritual cannibalism going on. Again, that's just an educated hypothesis. In some of the burials, we do find caches of Bufo marinus, which is a toad. So we find the remains of the little bones. So this is actually really, really super good preservation, because those bones don't necessarily preserve well because they're so small. But these are toads that have hallucinogenic properties. So I know toad looking is still an important part of, what's the word I'm looking for? Of some healing rites. So it's possible that that has really ancient origins. Some of the other things we find in Olmec burials are beads, shell ornaments, stingray spines. Many grave offerings have a jaguar motif that we're going to talk about here, because the jaguar is a very important figure in Mesoamerican society. It is the largest, most successful predator. In many of the early societies in both Central and South America, the jaguar is considered the master of animals and becomes associated with shamans. One thing that we know about the jaguar is that it's not afraid of water, so it became associated with water and in turn became associated with rain and fertility. So again, becoming very, very important for farming communities to be able to grow their crops, and of course just to have, potable water for drinking. So out of this particular ideas with the jaguar, the Olmec rulers become associated with the power of the jaguar. So they kind of take on the medicine of the jaguar, so that then that power that the jaguar has becomes theirs. So here you can see a ruler is dressed actually as a bird, but we also see elements of the were-jaguar here sitting on the were-jaguar throne. So what this does, it infers that the rulers have control over the rains and thereby the fertility of crops. Now, we do see this jaguar come up in a lot of the art, and in particular in this form called the were-jaguar. So it's a combination of jaguar features and human features. Some people have suggested we've got some feathered serpent ideology going on in here also, but we have this really nice anthropomorphic figure. Shows up on pottery. It shows up in serpentine statues. It shows up in jade statues. Shows up on these little carvings like this. So the were-jaguar, again, combination of human and animal traits. We find something called shenenkes here, and these are infant spirits that are associated with rain. They're normally made out of kaolin, which is not a native clay to the area. It actually has to be imported from central Mexico, so more evidence of those trade routes. Some other things the Olmec are famous for are their mosaics. This is actually a green stone, not necessarily jade. But again, here's the form of the were-jaguar. This was actually constructed and then buried. So the big question then would be, why would that happen? Why make something and then immediately bury it? If you want to see some really cool jade objects from the Olmec, you can go to this website. I actually just found it today, precolumbianjade.com, and they've got some really, really nice pictures of the various forms of Olmec jade, because we haven't really talked about all of them. Again, pan-regional trade. You can see here's the heartland of the Olmec, and they were trading all the way up here for jade, and they were also trading for serpentine, and this is also where the kaolin came from. You can see basalt all around here. The little dark diamonds are Olmec or Olmec influenced sites. So you can see they were actually quite extensive here, at least the influence. At the site of Chalcatcinco, some people have suggested this is actually an Olmec trading outpost. We do find simplified Olmec iconography, and again, this is where that kaolin came from. It's also where obsidian comes from. And again, this trade did probably help to facilitate the spread of Olmec traits. Probably, when people think of the Olmec, the first thing they think about are the colossal basalt heads, and these weigh several tons. And we find these at sites like La Venta, but the actual source, if you remember, was at Tres Zapote, so that's 60 to 80 kilometers away in the mountains. And the way they got these down to the sites was that they actually floated them down. So the common idea is that they actually carved it at the source, put it on a wrap, and then transported the finished product. And here's a basalt altar. The figures themselves are believed to represent ball players. And you can see a little bit of were-jaguar motif on the helmet of this particular ball player. So that brings us to the ball game, and let's talk about that a little bit more. You can learn more about it at www.ballgame.org, but this is the first recorded team sport, and it's pretty pervasive in Mesoamerican society, and virtually every major site has a ball court. Very, very few don't, and most of them have multiple ball courts. The modern version of this is called pelota, and the goal, or the whole purpose of the game, is to get a rubber ball into an end zone or through a hoop without using hands or feet. So, we know by 3600 BP they were using rubber. The ball was quite solid. It was about 8 pounds, about the size of a watermelon. But we do find some variety in the archaeological record. So we do find some that are about softball size all the way up to beach ball size. Rubber strips were often, or sometimes were found wrapped around skulls, human skulls, so they did use that as a ball also. The players were called Pitzla in Maya, he the player. That's what it's called in Mayan text, or language, and translates into he the player. They had a very specific uniform. And you can see they had a yoke around the center, and you can see it on these particular clay figures also. It was a protective belt made of fabric or stone, so it could have been quite heavy, and usually decorated in front with a hacha, which is an animal effigy. They wore headdresses as a part of the uniform. They had a yugito, which are padded shin protectors, and you can kind of see those here. Usually had wrists and armbands. Usually were wearing a necklace, and the Olmec wore helmets. Now we do find that there are very few women figurines dressed as Olmec, so whether they actually played it is kind of unknown. But again, very few and far between. Now sacrifice was also a part of this particular game. So in some accounts it was the winners who were sacrificed, in other accounts it was the losers, just depending on what the game was being played for.